Російські війська далі розташовані коло границь України та насторожують цілий світ. Критик зовнішньої політики Канади при консервативній партії Канади Майкл Чонг на програмі сьогодні оцінює дипломатичні старання міністра зовнішніх справ Канади Мелані Жолі та взагалі розгляне міжнародну політику канадського уряду.
Дорогі глядачі, вітаємо вас на українській телемережі «Контакт». І з нами тепер пан Майкл Чонг, який представляє міністерство чи критику консервативної партії відносно справ зовнішньої політики Канади. Welcome to our show, Mr. Chong. We saw this week a lot of material, public awareness, media about Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, Mélanie Joly, traveling through Europe and Ukraine. Do you think Canada is on the right track here in terms of supporting Ukraine in terms of the Russian aggression?
Well, we believe the Liberal government has to do more to support Ukraine. It must do more to help Ukraine defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty. Canada's security is inextricably connected to the security of Europe and NATO allies, and Russia's aggression toward Ukraine is an unacceptable violation of international law. So we have been calling for some time for the Liberal government to do more to help Ukraine. For example, we believe that the government should immediately announce the expansion and extension of Operation Unifier, which is a Canadian military operation in Ukraine that is training the Ukrainian military. That operation is to come to an end in March, just in 2 months. And the government has yet to announce whether or not it's going to extend the mission. We've also been calling on the government for some time to restore access to RadarSat imaging. RadarSat is a Canadian imaging, satellite imaging system. We believe that providing RadarSat imaging to the Ukrainian military and Ukrainian government will allow the Ukrainian military to track Russian troop movements and identify Russian equipment. We've also been calling on the Liberal government to provide Ukraine with military equipment for its defense, as has already been done by the United Kingdom, who several days ago shipped anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, and the United States, which has provided a lot of military defensive equipment. And finally, we've been calling on the Liberal government to use Magnitsky sanctions, sanctions that were created through a law that was introduced by Conservative Senator Andrewchuk a number of years ago. Use these sanctions against individuals responsible for Russia's aggression toward Ukraine. So these are some of the things that we have been calling on the Liberal government to do, and things that we're calling on them to do immediately.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. Now, one of the things that it seems to me, everybody's sort of pussyfooting around Mr. Putin. What's he going to do next? Is he going to attack Ukraine or not? And we're all sort of presenting responses to what he may or may not do. How about responses to what he's already done? Why doesn't Canada, for example, simply say, Putin, get lost? Leave the Donbass area, leave Crimea, leave behind a few $1 billion to straighten out the mess that you've done, and get lost. I know it's not a political type of statement, and get lost is not the sort of a nice way of saying things, but in essence, that's what the response to Putin should be.
Well, we've been calling on the Liberal government to use Magnitsky sanctions and other economic sanctions against individuals close to President Putin, as well as individuals in Belarus that are responsible for the illegitimate President Lukashenko's undermining of the rules-based international system and his allyship with President Putin. But often, in so many cases, while our European and American allies have acted to place these sanctions, the Liberal government has been absent. Part of the problem here is that Canada has lost some capacity to react to the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Our military has declined under the watch of the Liberal government over the last 6 years. We all know about the scandals that have been rocked by the military, in part because of the Liberal government's lack of leadership. We've all seen the erratic foreign policy of this government over the last 6 years. In fact, Canada has had an unprecedented 5 foreign ministers in less than 6 years. This is not a recipe for a stable, strong, clear foreign policy. It's a recipe for a very erratic approach to foreign relations, and I think that's reflected in our diminished standing on the world stage. So I think for those reasons, our capacity to act in defense of Ukraine has been limited by the management, the mismanagement, the ineptitude of the current Liberal government.
Mr. Chong, could we sort of switch over to the Conservative Party? Basically, similar issues, just different geography. What are the chances, that the Conservative Party could reinstate the Canada-China Committee that was so important, in past years? And what made the party cancel that in the first place, almost?
Well, thank you for the question and for giving me the opportunity to clarify the situation. There's been a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about this issue. It was always our intention to resurrect the Canada-China Committee. Unfortunately, because the government forced hybrid sittings on Parliament and its committees, the technological resources are limited in terms of adding a new committee to Parliament at this time. And so that limitation will be removed this coming June when the Special Committee on Afghanistan winds up and completes its work. And it's at that point that we should have the additional resources necessary to restart the Canada-China Committee. And so it's always been our intention to restart the Canada-China Committee. And we are working to introduce a motion to do exactly that when Parliament resumes in several weeks. Our policies on China remain unchanged. We believe that China presents a threat to Canada and to Canadians. And so we believe that the government needs to do a much better job in standing up to these threats to protect the safety and security of Canadians. There's no doubt that in the last election, we lost a number of seats with significant Chinese-Canadian communities. Our conclusion is that we did not lose those seats because of our policies. Our policies were not the problem. The problem was the disinformation that was spread by proxies acting on behalf of the communist leadership in Beijing. And the problem was that we didn't do a good enough job in tracking that disinformation on Chinese language social media platforms and reacting to it in real time, countering it with the truth.
It is actually pretty astounding. We're all concerned about Russian influence on U.S. elections, but here we have exact examples of China's influence in 3 ridings, all affecting the Conservative Party. And do you have in place programs that can counter this false information that's been being disseminated specifically to the Canadian Chinese community?
Well, we're in the process of completing our review of the election results. When that review is completed in the next several weeks, there'll be recommendations in it that will put in place an action plan to address this going forward. In addition to that, we continue to call on the Government of Canada to put a robust plan in place to counter this disinformation, to counter these intimidation operations that are operating on behalf of these malevolent foreign actors here on Canadian soil. And so we're continuing to call on the government to put in place this robust plan because it is subverting our democratic institutions and our democracy. We're also of the view that the CRTC needs to play a much stronger role when it comes to granting licenses and when it comes to renewing the licenses of radio and television broadcasters. There's evidence that some of the radio and television broadcasters operating in Canada are getting dangerously close, if not crossing the line of violating international law. There's evidence that some of these broadcasters have been airing forced and coerced confessions on air, parroting the propaganda out of authoritarian regimes like Beijing. There's also evidence that some radio stations are under pressure to not allow members of parliament on air, to not report on certain things because of pressure from Beijing. And so the airwaves, the regulated airwaves of radio and television are public airwaves. That's why we grant licenses for these broadcasters to use them. And we believe that the cabinet should be issuing a directive to the CRTC to make it clear to radio and television broadcasters that any violations of international law, any subversion of our democratic institutions because of pressure from Beijing will have an impact on the granting and renewal of these broadcast licenses. So those are some of the things that we are advocating for, some of the things that we believe need to be put in place in order to counter this disinformation that we've seen from Beijing.
Yes, it's pretty amazing with these dictatorships, if so-called, and we have the issue in Hong Kong. We have the potential aggression against Taiwan. We have the issue here with the election here now from China. We've got Russia and Ukraine, and it's all tied in ultimately to the Canadian Arctic, because China is already making inroads. Russia has started a long time ago, and if we let these non-democratic countries, if we give them rein now, we're never going to stop them later on.
No, and bringing up the Arctic is an excellent point, because the Arctic is in Canada's not only sphere of influence, it's part of our geography. And again, we've been calling on the Liberal government to make it clear that to come forward with a plan to renew the early warning system. As you know, there are hypersonic missile technologies that have been developed by authoritarian governments like Russia and China that present a threat to the security of North America. Canada is part of NORAD, and we participate in a mutual North American defense arrangement over our airspace in order to protect the safety and security of our citizens. That early warning system is out of date and needs renewal, and the government has been almost silent about what it intends to do to renew the system to ensure our collective security. And it's these sorts of issues that the Liberal government has dragged its heels on. It's not been clear. And I think it's starting to affect Canada's reputation on the world stage. I think increasingly we're not seen as a reliable and a reliable security partner. And I think that's the reason why in recent years we've been excluded from the quadrilateral security dialogue between Australia, Japan, India, and the United States, which is an effort to counter China's malevolent influences in the Indo-Pacific region. It's why we were recently excluded from the Australian, UK, US Submarine Defense Pact, the AUKUS agreement. And it's not just in the Arctic. You look at decisions on protecting our own national security here, our own telecommunications networks. We are the only Five Eyes intelligence partner that has yet to make a decision to ban or restrict Huawei from our telecom network. And so when you put this all together, it's a very worrisome picture of a government that is, frankly, asleep at the switch when it comes to not only working multilaterally with our allies, but also taking decisions to defend and protect this country's security and the safety of its citizens.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chong. Дорогі глядачі, це була розмова із паном Майкл Чонг, який є критиком в справах Foreign Affairs консервативної партії Канади. Mr. Chong, thank you very, very much. We kept you a little longer than intended. But I'm thankful and grateful to you that we touched on a lot of topics that are very, very, very specific to Canada. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. And we are seized with the issue of Ukraine. We know how important it is, not only to the security of Canada, but also to the millions of Canadians who trace their roots back to Ukraine. And I'm very proud to be a Conservative because it was a Conservative government that was the first government in the West to recognize Ukraine's independence after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so we've long believed in the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.